The objective arrow is a cool idea in my opinion, but it's far from perfect. Looking at it currently, it's in the center of the screen where everyone wants to look, and it even clips through the player name. So I decided to move this over to the UI instead. How would that even be possible? I cannot add 3D objects to the UI. Well, I can, but it doesn't render at all. The tip is to make a render texture and use a raw image that can process the render texture for the UI to use. To do that, I need to use another camera. But using another camera is pretty expensive, so I need to make sure that it doesn't use any more CPU or GPU power than needed. So I just cull everything but the arrow using layers and remove all the volume masks. Make sure the camera has no background, as well as changing the HDRP render assets color buffer. For some reason, using the other color buffer does not allow render textures to use transparency. So now the arrow renders, but it doesn't move. I just need to add a script that copies the original look at script and I'm done. But it looks boring. Everything in the UI seems to have outlines. What happens if I add an outline component? Oh, it works pretty well. Now, what about the objective point arrow? A 3D object with no matching outline. Looking around, there's no outline post-processing, but you can make it yourself using shader graphs and scripts, as well as using a custom pass draw renderer. After applying it doesn't look right, as it's using the screen to create the outline, and on top of that seems to be using a little extra processing power. So what I did next was make it 2D. I used a sprite and a sprite renderer and made it face the camera at all times. Now all I have to do is just make the objective point look brighter and it looks pretty good. Street objects are a fun addition to the game. Adding destructible objects is always fun for players and can create some odd obstacles for other players. However, every time the player destroyed one, their speed would just reduce to almost zero. Now, it would look funny if you would hit the object and it would fly forwards, matching your previous velocity. So to accomplish that, I used add force on the object's rigid body when struck. Using the previous impact velocity would decrease the object health, but it would happen each time you drove into it, destroyed or not. I only wanted this to happen when its health is above zero, as you already push it around when it's destroyed. So I moved a check that would make the street object be destroyed from the update function and moved it to the collision function. This would make it be checked when a collision happens and if the health is over zero. In turn, I moved the add force inside the statement. I moved it from the update function to the collision function, as the update function checks this every frame, and that would just take up way too much processing power. Air control is fun to use as it allows the player to create some interesting ways to traverse the map. Now, what if I changed some of the controls not only to make this easier but also added some basic aerodynamics to create more or less drag that can increase the distance or more precise movement? Firstly, the air control. Having to pitch and roll to point either left or right is just tedious and boring. Let's change the roll into a yaw and make a roll button so that the player can hold it down and use the new roll controls to roll instead. Awesome. Now, what about the aerodynamics? Well, I went about this by looking around to see how I could compare the player's forward direction to its velocity. And I ended up seeing a vector 3 dot product. Not sure how it works, but I know it outputs a value between -1 and 1. 1 being the player is pointing in the direction of the velocity and -1 being the opposite. Using an inverse lerp allowed me to get a percentage from 0 to 1, but multiplying that to a max drag value would only increase the drag if the player is aligned with its velocity. All I had to do was subtract it by 1 and it works. Now I have two problems. When the car is stuck, I yaw instead of rolling, and when I try to flip the car over, the suspension pushes it on its side. First is an easy fix, just check if the car is stuck or not. If it is, roll the car. The second one was a little confusing at first, but once I saw the suspension points were applying a force when it contacted the ground, I just made the car check if it is grounded before applying the suspension force, and now the car is rolling way smoother. The camera tilting in a similar way to when the car turns is a fun idea, but viewing this when the camera isn't facing the player is just weird. So using dot product and inverse lerp again, I compared the player's forward direction to the main camera's forward direction. From here I added another inverse lerp for the player's speed compared to its top speed, multiplied it by 5, then counted it from 0 to 1. I applied it to the camera tilt. This way the camera will only tilt the closer it is to facing the car's forward direction, and if the player is moving. This gives it a nice dynamic feel. I could have used a boolean, check to see if the car is moving instead of doing this inverse lerp stuff, but this is what I ended up with. As I was editing my last video, by the way, make sure to check it out once you finish this one, I got an idea when listening to how you could drop mines on players. Why not do this but it explodes an impact? So that's what I did. But first I had to change the movement script for the weapons, as it was checking things by reading the object name. I changed this to an enum that contains the weapon movement type, launching, timed, or falling. From there I changed bits of code to include this, and then made the weapon known as the bomb. As usual, I made an explosive one and an EMP one. How does it look after adding the weapons to the lists to spawn it as well as allowing the player to use it? Pretty good. It simply falls downwards and explodes on impact like a missile, as well as some extra code that made the bomb point downwards as it fell. Looking at the weapons, you notice that some have more effects than others. The missile has particles for smoke and a beep. The mine has an activation beep, a glowing ball that surrounds it, and also a beep. The bomb makes a falling sound. I wanted to add a little extra to the missiles and bombs, that being air trails. There are 4 trails for each fin for the missile and bomb. These have a short lifespan and fade away also. Finally, I made the missile and bomb spin as it flew or fell. This can be seen from the trails. Finally, I added trails and the bomb to the main menu. Oh, and the weapon icon bug was fixed. It works as intended. And that's all the things I've done since. I hope you enjoyed this newer form of video, as I feel like the last one sounded boring and didn't sound excited at all. I genuinely am excited for this project, as I've had to previously redo all the multiplayer functionality for things to work. And I'm very excited for the project going forward. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.